This is April 1st or 2nd, and I've been getting a bunch of calls about Blue Atlas Cedar. There are 3 Atlas Cedars that are genetically related, that are true cedars. One is the Atlas Cedar, the other is the Deodar Cedar, and the third is a Cedar of Lebanon. According to some taxonomists, there's a fourth, that the Cedar of Lebanon is doesn't have a subspecies, brevifolia. That's a separate species altogether. All these cedars are natives to the Mediterranean area, except one, or both of the Atlas cedar is native to Morocco and Libya, Algeria, in the Atlas Mountains. So that's how it gets its name. So that's northeast coast of Africa. The cedar of Lebanon is native in Lebanon, Syria, and Turkey, from sea level up, but mostly in the mountains. The cedar that they call brevifolia is pretty much isolated to a couple of islands in the Mediterranean, Crete and Malta. But some say they're the same tree, just a different race. Some say it's a different species. So, but the Deodar cedar is native to the Himalayas and Nepal, the foothills of the Himalayas and Nepal. So it's the farthest eastern one. And here's an example of this is Deodar cedar, and you can see how long and thin the needles are. In California, they call that the California Christmas tree. You'll see it in a lot of landscapes, and it's usually can be quite tall and kind of graceful as it weeps. It's a shade tree in its own right, but it needs a big yard. The reason I'm telling you about the Deodar cedar, since we don't use it much in bonsai, is because it's the rootstock on which all the cultivars are grafted. This is the Atlas cedar, or Blue Atlas cedar, and you can see that it's grafted to Deodar right there. This is the dwarf form of brevifolia. Brevifolia normally has the smallest needles in the cedar family, and this has the smallest needles among brevifolia. But it's stiffly upright, really hard to keep as a bonsai. You see, it's been wired down 2 or 3 times, and you can see how it wants to go. It normally is shaped like a vase and straight up, so it's just kind of a novelty. This is a Deodar cedar, and it's grafted onto a Deodar cedar because that's the only way you get this real silver blue color. It's really beautiful and makes a nice weeping bonsai, but I never, most people are afraid to try it. But you can see the graft is right there, and normally when you buy them in the nursery, they're about the grafts are up about that high. So I try to graft them low because that's what we're doing here is for bonsai. Okay, so a lot of people will have problems with Deodar, with cedars of any kind when they try to transplant them. And you have to treat a cedar like a cedar and not like a pine or a deciduous tree. They do not like their roots to be disturbed. There's a couple of places you can treat the roots pretty rough. One is if you live next to the ocean in a summer fog belt where you never get any heat. In California, there's an area like that around the San Francisco Bay where it's even so cold in the summer they can hardly grow black pine. And then there's another place where they have to be a little careful, but not really careful. It's on top of a ridge near the ocean in Northern California where they get 75 inches of rain a year during the summer. So for the rest of us, especially the more arid the climate, the more careful you have to be about touching the roots in any way, shape, or form. They do not like to have their roots pruned. And while they're normally a drought-resistant tree in their native habitat when they're rooted in the ground, in a bonsai pot they are not drought-resistant. So they need lots of water every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day if the pot is small. You can see this is a pretty big tree. It's in a little bitty pot, it has some rocks in the bottom. And the roots grow out. Those roots can be pruned when you move the tree from one person to another. But if you disturb them up here in the little pot, like in the wrong time of year, likely you'll lose the tree. There is a way to prune the roots if you absolutely must, and that is you have to put them in a support environment. They don't grow roots fast enough to support the new growth when it comes out. So if you root prune it in February or January or December, and you don't, it just sits until spring, and then the foliage comes out fairly early, not real early, but it starts growing on the top before the roots get going good. And so it can't repair those roots or replace them in time for the extra draw on the water, and it dies, just that simple. So if you put them in I have a poly house, it's 100 foot by 20, and in there that gets watered 2, sometimes 3 times a day overhead, wets the foliage, wets the root ball, and they love it in there. And if you leave them there until, if you have to do any serious root pruning of any kind, more than just barely a little bit, I leave them in there till the 1st of June and take them out, and they're usually, I haven't lost one yet doing that, but they need this 80-90% humidity. Doesn't matter if the humidity's high, it doesn't matter how hot it is in there. But my poly house is covered with poly that is 50% shade. So in that way I quit losing cedars, and I don't have any trouble transplanting them. They need to be treated as far as water goes in the same way you would a satsuki. It needs to be damp all the time. And what will happen is that you can realize that you're underwatering. The first thing a cedar will do is start looking, if it's halfway healthy, it'll start looking for water. And you can tell it's doing that when it starts circling the pot real heavy. It'll circle the pot with roots so much that it'll actually push the tree up out of the pot an inch or more. With that tree, you're going to have to do some pruning, and you're going to have to provide a support environment when you do that, root pruning, I mean. And so it's better to not let it get that way. This tree's been in this pot, this little orange pot, for 4 years, and it's never been transplanted. And I've got some on the place that are 8 years in the same can. This deodar cedar is 8 years in that can. And I've got a bunch of Atlas cedars out there, Blue Atlas cedars, that are the same age in the same can they've been in, and they're not suffering. If you buy a cedar, my advice is to decide what size of bonsai you want to finish with. Get you a pot that you like and put it in that pot and let it grow into the pot, and don't ever try to reduce the pot size. You could increase it pretty easy, but you can't reduce it. But if you want a shallow pot, then you need to start off shallow, because if you have to cut half the roots off to go in the pot, you'll lose the tree. So that's about all I've learned about cedars, is that they, while in the landscape, they're extremely drought tolerant. They are not drought tolerant in the pot, and they don't like their roots messed with without a support environment to support that foliage while the new roots grow. Hope that answers a few questions I've been getting on the phone lately that I don't have time to answer individually. If it doesn't answer a question, you can give me a call. Thanks.